In 1480 in Romania, Prince Vlad was living happily with his wife Elisabeta. As a testament to their love, Vlad gifted Elisabeta a small music box. One day, their joy was interrupted by knights, who dragged Vlad away as the battlefield needed him. The country was engulfed in the flames of war, and with the enemy closing in, Vlad ordered his soldiers to take Elisabeta to another castle for her safety. Before departing, Vlad received a blessing from the Pope, who asked for divine protection for his wife. In the forest, Elisabeta was being escorted to her new location. Unfortunately, an enemy soldier was hiding in a tree and swiftly took down 2 guards with quick arrows. The remaining guards prepared to fight and let Elisabeta ride ahead. Outside the forest, Vlad broke open a series of oil barrels to create a wall of fire to block the enemy. A fierce battle ensued, and soon soldiers from both sides lay dead everywhere. But Vlad's army clearly had the upper hand. With their superior skills and coordination, they fought their hardest to achieve victory. Moments later, Vlad and his army appeared before the enemy king, with the heads of all their foes impaled on their spears. That moment was interrupted when Vlad was informed of the attack on his wife, so he immediately left to find her. Meanwhile, Elisabeta was riding as fast as she could with the enemy in pursuit behind her. This area was known as Wolf Forest, and thousands of bear traps were hidden beneath the snow. 2 soldiers were taken down by these traps, while Elisabeta skillfully dodged them. Sadly, her horse finally triggered one and she fell, allowing the enemies to surround her as they carefully probed for traps with their swords. Elisabeta tried to move but stepped on another trap. When Vlad arrived, his horse was also taken down by a bear trap. He continued on foot and soon encountered 2 enemy soldiers, dispatching them quickly. Vlad threw his sword to kill a soldier advancing on Elisabeta, and it accidentally struck her as well. In despair, Vlad held Elisabeta close as she breathed her last. Sometime later, Vlad visited the Pope again and frantically questioned God for not protecting his wife, despite his having stained his hands with so many lives in his name. He wanted Elisabeta back and begged for a miracle the Pope could not grant. In a rage, Vlad killed the Pope with a crucifix and declared he would no longer serve God unless Elisabeta was resurrected. Suddenly, wind swept through the room and a statue of Jesus began to weep, but Vlad looked proud. His terrified soldiers had to drag him out of the church. 400 years later in France, a priest visits a mental hospital to speak with Dr. Dumont, who says he has a case so sensitive the Queen of England herself is worried. The 2 men then walk through the hospital's corridors, where dozens of madmen are acting out and are roughly dragged away by doctors. Finally, they went through a steel door leading down a tunnel to a sealed room, where Maria was chained. She was an Italian woman, the fiancée of the Queen's grandson, and as she objected to the wedding being held in the church, the wedding was held at the family's estate. However, the groom had invited a bishop to bless the ceremony, and seeing him drove Maria insane. The record stated she was born in 1759, which was impossible as it meant she was 130 years old. Her age and her aversion to God led them to wonder if she was a creature of the devil. While the 2 men were discussing her case, Maria woke up and hissed at them. The priest approached and noticed her fangs, so he concluded she was a vampire. He explained that she was the first to be captured alive and that vampires could go out in the light, they just couldn't tolerate direct sunlight. To prove it, he opened the window, and sunlight immediately burned her skin. When the priest held a crucifix before her, it burst into flames. He then cut the finger of Dumont's assistant Simon and dripped a few drops of blood into Maria's mouth to make her cooperate. The priest examined her neck and found the bite that had turned her into a vampire. He explained that the church had been fighting vampires for centuries, but they had yet to find the first one who had started it all. Desperate for blood, Maria mentioned that the first vampire was her master. He was a prince who would soon arrive in the city to find his princess. Meanwhile, the notary Jonathan was traveling through a forest at night. The coachman suddenly stopped the carriage and said he could go no further because wolves would soon appear, so he left Jonathan with his luggage, a torch, and a crucifix. Jonathan finished his journey on foot, keeping the wolves at bay with the torch. Finally, he arrived at a large castle, and as he passed through the gates, they closed automatically behind him. Another door opened and closed, allowing Jonathan into a room where someone was waiting on a balcony and then disappeared in a flash of lightning. Suddenly, Jonathan was startled by an old man who appeared behind him. The man threw the torch away and turned on the lights before introducing himself as Prince Vlad, also known as Count Dracula. The 2 men sat at a table, and Jonathan happily ate delicious food, but Dracula ate nothing. With a mere flick of his hand, Dracula sent a plate of food towards Jonathan, who thought it was just a trick. Jonathan then searched for some papers in his pockets, and while he was distracted, Dracula killed a mouse with a fork. he crushed it with his bare hands to pour blood into a cup and drank it. Jonathan explained that the district he represented was interested in purchasing an old convent in Paris that belonged to Dracula, hoping to turn it into a hospital. While retrieving more papers, Jonathan accidentally dropped his crucifix. When Dracula asked if he was a believer, Jonathan said no and shared that the coachman had given it to him. With another wave of his hand, Dracula tossed the crucifix into the fire and startled Jonathan by appearing beside him, stating it was time for bed. After Jonathan was taken to his room, Dracula instructed him not to leave his room at night. Dracula then returned to the dining room and put on some music before telling a stone monster to guard him. Jonathan found a book in his room and browsed through the historical explanations of the castle. There was a drawing of a young Vlad, but the portrait of the princess was missing. Meanwhile, the priest visited Maria's fiancé, Henry, and told him that Maria was well, but they were still trying to rid her of evil. The priest then searched Maria's room for more clues. Among her belongings, he found the missing page with Elisabeta's portrait. At midnight, Jonathan left his room. He was looking around when he noticed a light behind a door, so he went through and found strange stairs leading down to a luxurious basement. In the middle of the room, he saw a coffin, and when he opened it, he discovered Dracula sleeping. The Count said he shouldn't have left his room, and Jonathan was unexpectedly knocked out by a stone monster. When he woke up, Jonathan found himself chained by stone monsters. They hung him upside down, and Dracula cut his throat to let blood drip into a bowl. As Jonathan wondered how God could create such a creature, Dracula chuckled ominously and asked about his last wish. Jonathan wanted to know Dracula's story, and the Count found the idea so intriguing that he told the stone monsters to put him down. Dracula shares what happened while recalling Elisabeta's funeral. He explains that he has spent all these centuries waiting for her because he knows that pure souls can be reborn. The search for her was not easy. For instance, during the Black Death, half of the female population died, and the other half was concentrated in sanctuaries where he was not welcome. He became so lonely that he began to envy humans for being able to die. One day, Dracula fell asleep on Elisabeta's grave. The next morning, he woke up in such despair that he went to the nearest window and tried to commit suicide. However, he survived the fall. Dracula continued to try again and again, but no matter how many times he fell, he always survived. Since he could not search for Elisabeta all over the world, Dracula decided that he needed a plan to lure her to him. For over a century, he developed a perfume using the most beautiful and magical flowers from the most famous gardens. Finally, he tested the perfume in Italy, where the women immediately began to follow him. The scent was so strong that Dracula could go to parties and make everyone dance in perfect unison under his control. One day in Versailles, Dracula thought he had finally found Elisabeta, but the woman he approached was not his wife. This mistake made him cry and realize that he had been dancing from one party to another, filled with wine and debauchery, but not true love. He decided to stop searching and let others do it for him. In the middle of the party, Dracula began to bite all the women in the room to turn them into vampires, including Maria. Then, Dracula returned to Elisabeta's tomb and opened it. He smashed the coffin and discovered that only Elisabeta's ashes remained. The sight shattered him, and he vowed never to leave the castle again. The stone monsters would bring him riches and serve as his attendants while his vampires continued their search. Jonathan now tells Dracula that he can understand such strong love because he is also engaged. His locket contains a picture of his fiancée, Mina, so Dracula looks at it and is overcome with emotion as he realizes this woman is the reincarnation of his wife. Dracula then decides to let Jonathan live in gratitude for helping him reunite with his love. He summons all his stone monsters and tells them to bring him lots of blood, because he needs to be handsome before meeting Elisabeta. In Paris, the priest shows Dumont the portrait he found, saying they need to find a woman who looks like her to capture Dracula. The priest reads a passage from a book, explaining that God may refuse death in cases of blasphemy. However, God may also forgive a sinner in cases of true repentance, which will break the curse. This means that if they kill Dracula, all the vampires he created will turn back into humans. Just then, Simon enters the office and notices the portrait, pointing out that a woman who looks exactly like her is in the waiting room. Dumont and the priest rush into the other room and meet Mina, who explains that she is Maria's best friend. They met a few days prior at a party, and Maria has not left her since. Maria was always very kind until the wedding, when she went mad upon seeing the bishop. Mina admitted that she harbored doubts about her own wedding because she felt like she didn't belong in this era. At the convent, Dracula appeared in the guise of a homeless man, and the nuns agreed to give him shelter. However, he shed his disguise as soon as he entered the chapel and sprayed his perfume on a statue of Jesus, causing all the nuns in the convent to rush into the chapel. They knelt as desire overwhelmed them, and soon they formed a pile around Dracula, desperately seeking his attention. Without hesitation, Dracula began to drain them of their blood. At the castle, Jonathan waited until he was alone to throw a blanket over some tools to pull them closer and break his chains. When a stone monster entered, it discovered Jonathan climbing out of the window. It immediately cut the blanket to sever his support, but Jonathan managed to cling to the wall. The stone monsters then began trying to reach him through some crevices, but to no avail. So one of them used a hook to knock him down. Jonathan rolled down the snow, and his body came to rest on a frozen lake. When a stone monster tried to follow him, the ice broke and it drowned, so the others didn't know how to reach him. Noticing this, Jonathan began to flee in extreme terror. Sometime later, Dracula arrived at the asylum looking young and healthy. He used his perfume to control Simon and had him lead him to Maria's room. Maria told Dracula that she had found Elisabeta, and he rewarded her by letting her drain Simon's blood. In the morning, the priest was studying and found a photo of Vlad. He was then called to the hospital, and Dumont told him Maria had disappeared. Simon had become a vampire and was tied to his bed. The priest noticed Simon's fangs and a very strong perfume scent on his clothes. When Dumont shared a description of the intruder who had taken Maria, the priest realized Mina was in danger. At the inn, Mina opened the door at the sound of a knock and was astonished to see Maria looking healthy, who told her that Dumont had discharged her. Maria explained that she had a friend who was very eager to meet Mina and had her change into nicer clothes. The two women then went to a hotel where Dracula was waiting. Seeing his wife's face again brought tears to his eyes. After showering Mina with compliments, Dracula kissed her hand, which gave her an illusion of them together. Feeling quite uneasy, Mina withdrew her hand and left with Maria to enjoy the festival. Dracula followed them as the two women enjoyed food, drinks, games, a show about a fake mermaid, and cute animals. As they entered a haunted house, the two women accidentally separated, and Mina got lost. She screamed when a fake skeleton startled her, and Dracula immediately appeared beside her to lead her out. At the shooting gallery, Dracula taught her how to shoot, and in his arms, Mina had another illusion of the past. Dracula then invited them to rest in his hotel room while waiting for the fireworks. Mina and Dracula chatted for a while, and he showed her his small music box. As he played the song, Mina found it familiar and began to hallucinate about being Elisabeta. She immediately recoiled and accused Dracula of bewitching her. Dracula tried to tell her the story of Elisabeta and his hope of her reincarnation, but she insisted she was only Mina. He ended their conversation by giving her the music box. Maria then dragged Mina away to see the fireworks display. Later that night, Dracula took Mina home, leaving her with a radiant smile. But her happiness was replaced by shock as she found the priest and Dumont tending to a sickly Jonathan in the drawing room. The priest told her what had happened to her fiancé, but Mina refused to believe that Dracula could be cruel, so the priest had to explain that Dracula was a vampire who fed on people and used perfume to control his victims. He checked her neck and was relieved to find no bites. Mina ran to her room to cry alone and eventually opened the music box. She kept having visions of Elisabeta and only broke out of them when Dracula appeared beside her. Mina asked him to leave, so Dracula tried to climb out the window. Unaware of his powers, she thought he was about to commit suicide and made him stop. She then started accusing him of deceiving her, so Dracula assured her that he had never used perfume on her and threw the bottle into the fire. Next, she brought up the blood-sucking. Dracula admitted he did so but promised she would never be his victim. Mina's nose began to bleed, so Dracula collected the blood on his finger and licked it. Then, he took her hand and spoke romantic words to her while the illusions returned. Hearing the last words he spoke to Elisabeta, Mina finally accepted the memories as her own and called Dracula her love. Before kissing him, they finally made love, and Mina requested immortality, so Dracula bid her to transform her. Just then, the priest smelled a perfume similar to what he had detected in the hospital and realized Dracula was in the house. He grabbed a gun and rushed to Mina's bedroom, only to find it empty. The priest and Dumont thought Dracula must have taken Mina back to his castle, and Jonathan agreed to take them there. Meanwhile, Maria reunited with Henry. She was very affectionate with him as a way to keep him distracted. As she was about to bite him, the priest's group interrupted her. Maria roared in anger and prepared to attack, so the priest shot her down. However, Maria quickly recovered and knocked Henry down before grabbing the priest to try and kill him. Jonathan found a sword on the wall and immediately used it to behead Maria. Her head flew off and knocked Dumont down, while her body choked the priest for a bit longer before falling. As it was still twitching, the priest took a crucifix and stabbed Maria through the heart to kill her once and for all. In Romania, a group of servants left a coffin inside the castle. Dracula and Mina stepped out, and he led her on a tour of the castle. After meeting stone monsters, Mina played music from a box and wore Elisabeta's dress. At the castle gates, the priest's team arrived with some soldiers. They waited for the servants to leave and rushed to hold the gates open so they could get inside. One soldier shot at the front doors while those near the woods fired cannons, causing many parts of the castle to collapse. Dracula told Mina to stay in her room while he went out to fight, but Mina was terrified as the cannon fire destroyed her ceiling. The monsters descended to fight the soldiers, knocking them down time and again. However, the army was much larger, so it was not difficult for the humans to continue to advance and take the castle. Jonathan led his friends to the crypts, while the soldiers searched the upper floors. Mina saw them coming and locked the door. In the crypts, the soldiers fired upon the coffin. Unfortunately, Dracula appeared behind Jonathan and knocked him down while calling him ungrateful. He then began fighting the soldiers with a sword, moving quickly between them with precise thrusts to take them down one by one. Soon, more soldiers arrived, but Dracula killed them just as quickly. Henry took advantage of this chaos to shoot Dracula with 2 guns at once, but to no avail. Dracula leaped onto him and bit his neck. With a mere flick of his wrist, Dracula closed the doors to prevent more soldiers from entering and held his sword to the priest's throat. The priest told Dracula that God never wanted him to kill for him, as God did not want his creations destroyed. When men killed, they did it for themselves. When the priest said that he was sent by God to save Dracula, the count pointed out that his only salvation was Mina. However, the priest says Dracula will be her damnation. Hearing Mina scream in the room, Dracula rushes to her aid and tells his stone monsters to buy him time. While the stone monsters fight the men in the Great Hall, Dracula kills all the soldiers in the corridors. When they are all down, he rushes into the room to reunite with Mina in an embrace. The priest tries to follow him, so Dracula closes the door. However, the priest reminds him that if he truly loved his wife, he must do the right thing. Ignoring Mina's pleas, Dracula leaves the room and locks Mina inside. He leans against the door, and the priest prays to his god while driving a stake through Dracula's heart to kill him. Afterward, Mina pulls him into the room so they can share their last loving words before Dracula turns to dust. All the lights in the castle go out, and the stone monsters turn into human children. Jonathan comes looking for Mina and finds her crying over a pile of ash, now blowing in the wind. Realizing he has lost his love, Jonathan leaves. Outside the castle, Dracula's ashes blow away in the wind. My story ends here. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching until the end of the video, and see you again.